there, Michelle Short here for My Favourite Things. Today I have a simple scene card to share with you using Long Walk with a Best Friend. So let's get started. This is the adorable Yuzu Long Walk with a Best Friend set. I'm going to stamp a few of the images, but I'm going to do them in two separate ways. So I'm starting off with two images that I know that I'm going to die cut out. So I've got the girl here and her dog, and I'm going to stamp them down onto some white cardstock using black ink. So I'm going to ink up the images really well using black ink, and I'm using the Mini Misty here so that I can stamp them multiple times if I need to. So pressing them down, and I am going to stamp them twice just to make sure that I get really nice crisp impression. I'm then going to take a panel of white cardstock that's cut to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches, and this is going to be my background panel that I'm going to add the images on top, and then also this is going to then go onto my card base. So I'm bringing in the sentiment here, and I'm going to use that kind of like a grounding. I'm not going to add any ground onto my panel here, onto my scene, so the sentiment is going to kind of work for that. So just figuring out where I want that sentiment to be, and then one of the greenery pieces I'm going to stamp on the left hand side, and it's going to overlap this base a little bit so that it looks like the image is actually kind of like bigger than the actual scene that I'm creating. I do want to make sure that I'm stamping my sentiment straight, so I'm going to stamp it down onto a piece of clear plastic. That way, if my sentiment isn't straight, I can readjust it and then stamp it down onto my panel, and I'm not going to waste that cardstock. Thankfully it was straight, so I didn't need to rearrange it. So I'm inking up the sentiment and the greenery piece with black ink again, and again I'm going to stamp those twice just to make sure that I get really nice dark crisp lines. I'm then going to turn the Mini Misty around. I believe this is the way that most people use it. I think I use it upside down, but that's just the way that it works for me. So in this instance, I want this greenery piece to overhang the other side, so it was just easier for me to have the Mini Misty the other way around. I'm then going to stamp these onto some mask paper because I want to stamp another one on the inside, and then I also want to do some ink blending on this panel as well, so I want to use the masking paper for both reasons. So I'm just stamping those down, and I remembered that I need a third one for when I do my ink blending, so I'm just going to stamp that down as well. I'm then going to fussy cut them out with scissors. When I fussy cut masking images out, I like to make sure that I cut on the line or kind of just inside of the line, because if I was to cut on the outside of the line, I might get kind of like a little white halo around the image, which I don't really want. So I'm trying my best here to move the image rather than the scissors, and I'm just going to go around these images. I can then remove the backing off of that masking paper, and then I can pop them down onto the image panel. So just doing that one there on the right hand side, and then I can do the same thing for the one here on the left hand side. I'm then going to position another one of those greenery pieces inside those two on either side. So it's going to have it so it's a whole line of these greenery pieces. I'm assuming they're bushes, but I wasn't 100% sure, so I think you could use them in lots of different ways, to be honest. Again, inking that up twice just to make sure that all of my images have the same depth of colour. And then I can place the other mask on top. And this is so that I can add some ink blending above. I wasn't sure whether I really wanted like a full scene here. I wasn't necessarily going for a full scene, but I still wanted a little bit of sky to make it look like it's part, like I say, of like a bigger scene. So I'm using some Mermaid Lagoon Distress ink and an ink blending brush, and I'm just being really light-handed here. I don't want this to be covering the whole of the top of this kind of panel here, I want it to fade out to white on all of the sides and just be a little bit darker towards the greenery. So going in with a few layers here just to get the depth of colour that I want. And like I said, trying to make it kind of wispy looking. Then I can remove that memo tape and then also the masking. And I'm going to keep those mask pieces with my stamp set in case I want to use them again. I'm then going to colour in the images with Copic markers. So I'm starting off with the girl's skin and I'm mapping out the darkest areas using my darkest shade, which is E13. I've got a lot of colouring to do here, so I am going to speed up this colouring portion, but I have left it all in. So mapping out where I think the darkest areas will be on this image, I'm thinking that the light source is mainly towards the left-hand side. I'm then blending that out with the E11. Now my E11 is very juicy, so I like to remove both caps so that it kind of equalises the pressure inside of the marker and I don't get any extra kind of glooping or anything like that of the ink. I then blended that out with the E00 and then blending that out even further with the E50, which is my darkest shade. And I wasn't particularly happy with the blending, so I'm going back in with the three lightest shades, the E11, the E00, and then blending that out again with the E50. And I'm definitely happier with the second layer of colour. I'm then adding a little bit of blush for her cheek with R20. You don't see a huge amount of this, but it's quite nice just to have it there. And then for the hair, I'm going in with like a flicking motion so that it looks like there's strands of hair. Now, I don't always do this with images. Sometimes I like to just colour them quite smooth and get like a really nice smooth blend. But it is a little bit more realistic if you do it with kind of like a flicking motion. But quite often for me, I find that it looks a bit messy. I love it when other people do it, but for me, I find that it just ends up as a big mess. But some images I do think look better with this kind of method of colouring hair, so that's why I'm doing it today. So I started off with E29 and now I'm going in with E27 and just kind of moving those flicks even longer towards the centre of the image. Then going in with E25, then going in with E23, and then I'm going to fill in the rest of the white area with E21. So for this layer, I'm not kind of like flicking it in. I don't want to leave any white areas. So I'm just going over the rest of the image, like the image of her hair with this E21. And then for her trousers, I wanted them to look a little bit like jeans. So I'm using some muted blue shades. So I'm starting off with my darkest shade, which is B99. Again, mapping out where I think the darkest areas will be. And then I can blend that out with the E97. Then I can go in with the E95. And then blend that out further with the B93. And I do go back in with the B95 and the B93 just to try and get a nice smooth blend. I do think in real life it looks a little bit of a smoother blend than it does on camera. Then for her top here, I'm going in with some purple shades, and because my darkest shade is very, very dark, I'm adding a layer first of the V17, and then I can go over that with my darkest shade, which is the V09. Sometimes if I go in directly with the V09, I don't get a smoother blend as I would like, and that V17, just having that kind of base of it helps for me. So bringing in that darkest shade, and then I can go back over that with the V17 and then blend that out further with the V15. And then I'm also using the V17, the V15 and the V12 for her hairband, and then also the collar on the dog as well. So just going in with the lightest shade here, which is the V12. And then for the kind of end part of this, I do kind of jump between the V15 and the V12. Again, just trying to get a smoother blend as possible. But I do like having that really kind of dark area on this kind of, I don't know if it's like a hoodie, like a short sleeve hoodie, because she's got kind of like a top underneath it as well. Then for her trainers, I'm using C5, and then also kind of like the little top underneath as well. Blending that out with the C3 and then the C1 and then C00. And then I am going to use those same shades on the dog as well. So I'm starting off with C5. Again, just mapping out the darkest areas. I'm trying to colour the dog kind of like a Westie, so quite light in colour, like really kind of white. Sometimes they have more of like a creamy colour sort of hue to them, but I decided to go with more of like grey tones. So just kind of really mapping in the shadow areas rather than colouring in the dog itself, if that makes sense. So I'm blending that out with the C3, then the C1, and then the C00. And then for his ears, I'm using R12, R00, and then I'm going to blend that out with the R000. And then I do go in with the colourless blender just to make sure that there's no harsh edges at the bottom of that ear. And then for the nose, I'm using C7 and C5. And then to finish off, I'm colouring in the bone there on his collar using E50. So then to the background panel, I want to colour in these greenery pieces, and I'm starting off with my darkest shade here, which is G29. Now ordinarily this would be a colour that I would also do in the same way that I did with the purples. So I would add in a base layer of YG17 first and then go over it with the G29, but because I knew that I wasn't too concerned with how this was going to blend, because they're bushes and kind of leaves and things like that, they don't really need to be perfectly blended. It actually would look better if they weren't. So I decided not to. However, you can see that when I go in with the lighter shades, the YG17 and the YG23, that my G29 is a little bit sticky and it is adding some kind of lighter areas in places. So I'm just blending that out with the YG01 is my lightest shade, and I decided just to leave it as is. I'm not particularly massively happy with it, but it's not the end of the world having that kind of stickiness on that marker, but I am going to go and clean it now. So I'm taking the coordinating dynamics, placing those on top of the images here, and then I can run that through my die cutting machine. I've then adding some thin foam tape onto the back of the background panel. And then I can place that down onto an A2 size card base, and that's made from grape jelly cardstock. I thought that the purple would work quite nicely with the purple shades in the images. So I've added some more thin foam tape onto the back of the images here, and I'm using my tweezers just to hover them in place so that I can see where I want them to be placed before I stick them down. So just trying to make sure that she's straight there. And then I'm just going to very gently stick her down. I'm not going to press her down. I want to add the dog first, and in case I need to move her, I don't want her completely well stuck down. So I'm just going to add the dog in here, and then once I'm happy with the placement, I can really press them down. I'm then adding some crystal glaze onto the dog's nose to make it shiny. So just adding a dab of that, and I'm using a pokey tool just to move that around. And then to Finish off the card, add a little bit of an embellishment. I'm using some iridescent droplets, and what I thought I would do with these is it's kind of like going to balance out the card a little bit, because most of the imagery is towards the bottom of the card, and that's fine. I'm quite happy with that, but because the girl is quite tall, there's not much going on towards the top of the card, so I'm using the embellishments really just to kind of balance out the card, but it is quite nice having that kind of sparkle on there as well. And that crystal glaze is going to dry completely clear and add a really nice shine onto the dog's nose. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.